Miss Sidney Powell is responsible for the murder of her mother, Brenda, and she was not suffering from a severe mental illness or disease that prevented her from knowing the wrongfulness of what she did. Miss Powell is building these lies. She's consciously coming up with them. Mount Union had dismissed her. Her parents were concerned. Her tuition was canceled. Her scholarship was canceled. Her enrollment was canceled. Miss Powell couldn't keep the lie up anymore, and in that moment, she struck her mother with a cast iron frying pan over and over and over.
A young woman serving a possible 15 to life sentence for her mom's brutal murder has now won her appeal and will be granted a new trial. At just 23 years old, Sidney Powell was found guilty of killing her mother Brenda with a frying pan and a kitchen knife. Her defense argued that she was having a mental health crisis at the time. Now, immediately following her sentence, Powell appealed her conviction, and that appeal centered on 4 arguments. But in its decision, the appeals court focused on only the first. The trial court committed an error by preemptively barring the defense from presenting a surrebuttal case. So you know how prosecutors have a rebuttal case after the defense goes? This defense wanted to go again afterward. Our question is, will this decision by the appellate court tip the scales of justice for Sidney Powell at her new trial? And we have the absolute perfect person to break this down with us. We have Sidney's defense attorney, also a friend of the show, Don Malarsic, is with us. Don, thank you so much for being with us this morning. Congrats on this win for your client in terms of the appeal. But talk to us about what happened. What tipped the scales for her in the appellate system?
Yes, good morning, Julia. Thanks for having me. I don't think this was really a close call. As you laid it out, the defense has the opportunity to rebut the state's star witness. The state had one expert that they brought in to testify that disagreed with our 3 experts, and we did not have an opportunity to rebut her testimony, her methodology, the way that she conducted her test. You know, we had 3 experts with a combined 50 years experience who sat with Sidney for over 30 hours and performed over 25 diagnostic tests to determine that she was seriously mentally ill. The state's experts sat with Sidney for 2 hours and did no testing at all. None, 0. And we were not allowed to rebut that. We would have had our experts come up and say it is wholly improper to make a diagnosis without doing these objective tests that are relied on in the field of psychology. So I think the Court of Appeals got it right, and I think it really does tip the scales if the jury had the full information of how untrustworthy the state's expert was.
So what happens now? When you hear overturned conviction, you think, oh, the person gets released from jail and they are a free person. They have nothing on their record, but it's not quite what happens. This is the appellate court sending it back to the lower court, right?
That's exactly right, Julia. And there's one other step here. You know, the prosecutor's office could decide to try to get into the Ohio Supreme Court. They have 45 days from the decision yesterday to try to do that. The Ohio Supreme Court takes a very low percentage of cases. This doesn't feel like a case that they would want to take because it is a very narrow issue. But what happens next is, assuming the prosecutor's office does not try to appeal this, it does go back to the trial court, and we would be getting a new trial date. In the meantime, however, in Summit County here in Ohio, we do have a newly elected prosecutor, and I look forward to reaching out to him and talking to him. I was very concerned at the first trial. The victims' rights were ignored and really trampled upon. The victims' rights, Brenda's husband, Brenda's mother, they did not want to see this case go to trial. And they were ignored and their rights were violated. So my hope and my expectation is this new prosecutor is going to take a fresh look at this case, listen to the victims, and hopefully we can work out some type of a resolution. But right now, Sidney is in prison. She will stay there and listen until the jury or the judge does something different.
And you mentioned the victims, the people who love not only the victim who was killed, but love Sidney as well. I want to take a look back at Sidney's father, Stephen Powell, testifying during the trial.
Sir, up until March 3rd of 2020, had Sidney ever seen a psychologist or a counselor?
No.
Okay. And up until that point, you or Brenda never had any concerns about her mental health?
No.
Now, is there anything, Don, you can tell us about their reaction, the family, but also Sydney's reaction to this breaking news about the case?
Yeah, I spoke to Sydney's father, Steve, yesterday and told him the good news. He was ecstatic. He was hopeful, but it also brings up some really difficult memories. That trial was really torture for Sydney's family, for her grandmother, and for Stephen Powell. They do not want to go through another trial. So they are hopeful that the prosecutor will listen to them and we can work something out. We have been in contact with Sydney. She was very happy, but very reserved. She has been betrayed by the criminal justice system before, and she knows how difficult it is to get a jury or a judge to see through a really difficult crime scene and understand mental health is real. So I'm hopeful that we're going to be able to get Sydney back here in Summit County. I can see her soon here in Summit County. We'll get a new trial date, and we will work very hard to try to get her out and get her the help that she desperately needs.
And Don, thank you for that insight. And that's interesting to hear about the new prosecutor and how that could really change things in how this case moves forward. Because I remember there was this clash over the type of charges, them going forward, them not offering perhaps something lower in this case. And what also stands out to me about this case is just how fervent you were in your representation. I know you likely do that for every single one of your clients, but this seemed like one that really hit home and was personal for you. Can you talk about what stands out about this case for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I learned a lot about being a father from Stephen Powell, Sydney's father in this case. And my daughter is about Sydney's age, and they were both going away to school for the first time, to college. And I really saw my daughter, my family in Sydney and with Stephen Powell. This is an all-American family. They went to a Catholic high school. They had no prior issues. We had teachers testifying on behalf of Sydney. We had former police officers who were friends with the Powell family. We had Sydney's friends testifying. This was the all-American family that suffered an incredible tragedy. And I felt the weight and the responsibility of trying to bring them some sense of closure, some sense of peace. And this was really the best Christmas present I've ever received.
Wow. Don Milarczyk, thank you so much for keeping us up to date on what has happened in this case that touched so many of our viewers. And we will, of course, be continuing this as it moves through the criminal justice system.